So, good evening, you all. It's Tuesday evening, well into June now. Temperature is rising in our part of the country, at least. And we'll begin with the first question from a viewer. Well, actually, it's kind of the last question of a viewer from last week. We had a question last week from a teacher who was having trouble with her students, who she referred to as sometimes just very difficult. And she wondered, essentially, is it always me? Or can I not sometimes blame the way that I feel, frustrated, irritated, and so on my students? Pretty understanding that we would want to blame our behavior on other people, because it's really no different whether it's our husband, wife, child, friend, mother, or students in our class. It's pretty much all the same principle. And, it really is always us. She went on and said, well, but, some of these kids are very annoying. Well, the point is that they are not annoying. They may be difficult, they may be loud, they may be distracting, they may be inattentive, but not annoying. Whether we feel annoyed by a particular behavior is determined by how loved we feel and how loving we are capable of being. This is not an accusation. If you don't feel sufficiently loved and loving, and a student comes along who you find irritating, it's just information. It's just information that in that moment you don't have adequate love and very often skills to handle that particular situation. So you learn from it. But it all starts with telling the truth. Instead of saying, that child is so irritating, which would also apply to marriages and parent-child and any other relationship, or bosses or employees. Instead of saying that child is irritating, or whoever else, then the appropriate thing to say, if we're really being truthful, is, this is an unexpectedly difficult stimulus, unexpectedly difficult situation. And I'm discovering that I'm not feeling as loving as I had thought, as I had imagined. This is proving to be a greater burden on my ability to be loving than I would have guessed. So I'm not doing very well. I'm reacting poorly. So what can you do in a situation, where the students are difficult, where they're loud, where they're distracting, where they're not paying attention? And you do what is taught in the parenting book, and I recommend the parenting book to every teacher on the planet. I haven't written the book yet called Real Love in the Classroom, although I've outlined it, which will be a book applying real love principles to teachers, to students, to administrators, and to parents. And haven't done it yet, just we'll get there someday. So it's all about loving and teaching. We love and teach when we come across situations like this that are difficult with people for whom we have responsibility. So love and teach becomes one word. And you have to do it simultaneously. So what would loving a difficult student look like? Well, wow, there are 100 different ways to demonstrate it, and many of those are described in the parenting book, but let's look at a few of them. So examples might be that difficult children, when they're being snotty or irritating or whatever, we tend to become irritated at them, disappointed. We act disappointed in them. We roll our eyes. We sigh. And as soon as we do that, the child immediately knows that they're not loved. So at the very least, being loving is the absence of these behaviors, getting and protecting behaviors, acting like we're victims when they act like that, the absence of anger, that's just critical, because the instant we do that, the instant we use any getting or protecting behavior, well, then we're saying we're concerned about ourselves and that we don't love the kid. And the kid feels it. So absence of disappointment, the absence of anger, looking at them. When somebody's irritated, we tend not to look directly at them. And that's an important thing to do. And I mean looking at them gently, not with a scowl, not as in staring them down. And, little things that we tend to forget when people are being difficult. Smiling at them, talking to them, and being sensitive to what would matter to them as opposed to talking at them. Many teachers whom I have asked, so what do you teach? Immediately respond, and it's understandable that they would. I teach algebra, I teach French, I teach math. And with a little questioning, the point that I'm trying to make is that it's not subjects that we teach, it's students that we teach. And if we're trying to cram a subject down the students' throats, we'll lose. And we need to be ourselves. We need to be ourselves as gentle, kind, loving human beings, instead of just occupying the role of teacher, which makes us look really like inanimate. It makes us seem like tyrants. It makes us seem separated from them when we're simply filling a role instead of being a loving human being. And the other thing that we can do to be loving is to simply admit that we're wrong. Teachers don't do that very well. Most parents don't do it very well either. But rarely in all of my history of going to school did I ever have a teacher say, "Oh, my mistake. I did that wrong. I made a mistake as far as the material, or I made a mistake to be irritated, or I made a mistake to in any regard." It's very endearing to those that we teach when we quickly admit our mistakes. Part of learning is making mistakes. So if we expect them to admit theirs in the process of learning, how can we expect them to do that unless we set an example of admitting the truth about ours? So now, how do we teach them? Again, it's important not just to teach the material, but to teach them. So when we talk, it's important to relate what we're teaching to their personal experiences. If possible, tell stories that relate to them. Learn enough about your students that rather than tell stories about sterile, abstract, unrelated people and events, learn enough about them that you can relate the subject to things that are going on in their lives, so that you can say things like, this is just like the event that happened to you, Susie, yesterday in class. Or this is like the interaction between you, Tony, and your brother, or between you, Tony, and another member of the class. When it's obvious to the students that you care enough about them to relate the material to their lives, what a difference it makes. Now, it may seem like it would be difficult to do that when it comes to, it would be easy relatively to relate things to their lives when it comes to sociology, history, psychology, anthropology, even languages. I mean, in French, for example, you can tell stories about them in the language that you're teaching. In English, you can still relate it to their lives because they write essays about what they're doing. It may seem like it would be difficult to do that with math and science, but even there, students have to do work problems or things that relate to real life, and you can draw these work problems from their real life situations. And at the very least, use their names instead of the made-up names from the books. So, really important. There's so many ways that you can make the class come alive for a kid. Now, what if a kid's disruptive? The first thing we tend to do is become annoyed and tell a kid to stop it. This is the opportunity to teach a kid. So when a kid is, for example, talking to the kid next to him, rather than telling him to stop, I just stop and look at the kid until the kid is looking at me. and then ask him what he was talking about. And if there's any way that I can relate what the kid was talking about to the material at hand, and boy, can you be creative. The conflict, for example, if a teenage kid is talking about the conflict that he was having with a girlfriend, you can relate the conflict of individual human beings to the conflicts of history in sociology and history. I mean, it goes on and on. It's up to you to be the creative one here. You're the teacher, rather than just a policeman saying, be quiet. Another thing that you can do when a kid is being disruptive is to wait when you're speaking to another student and the student is giving an answer. And there's another student, so you're talking to student A, and student B is talking to some kid in the back. And so you ask student B to tell you what he was doing. Now it's obvious what he's doing. He's talking to the kid next to him. But you guide the conversation until student B, for example, says, well, I was not paying attention to what was going on. I was talking to somebody else. Then you bring up the point that not only was student B not paying attention, but he wasn't also listening to what student A was saying. In other words, he was, and when we don't listen, and give them an illustration, say to student B, so if you're talking to me, and then I just suddenly turn and talk to somebody else in the middle of our conversation, what am I doing? I'm completely disrespecting you. I'm telling you I don't care about you, telling you I don't love you, I'm telling you you're worthless. So you continue with preferably doing it in a questioning way, so that you say, so what message were you communicating to student A as she was talking to me? Were you communicating to her that you cared enough about what she was saying to listen to what she's saying, or were you communicating that you don't care what she was saying? And would you like to stand up and communicate, instead of doing it sidewards and secondhand, would you like to stand up and communicate to student A, I don't care what you have to say. In which case now student B has the uncomfortable position of having to communicate to the student that you were talking to that he doesn't care about them, which is considerably less comfortable than just simply sitting in the back of the room and talking to another student. What you're trying to communicate to these students is that everything that they're doing has a meaning, and you're drawing that out of them. You're trying to teach them what being disruptive and not paying attention means, how unkind and unthoughtful that is to the people around them, and the significance that that will have when they leave class, when they do it with coworkers, when they do it with people they're in relationships with, when they do it with bosses, so that they can see it's not just you trying to control them, and you teach them this just with a completely calm demeanor. Here's an opportunity for you to teach them about life, to teach them about social interaction, to teach them about relationships, as opposed to just being a tyrant and saying, stop it. When we do that, we don't teach our kids a darn thing, except that we're the boss and we can make them shut up. They don't learn anything from that except to resent us. Which is not very useful. Our next viewer says, my friend's sister was in the intensive care unit and was in pretty bad shape last week. He told me by way of text just how frustrated and stressed he was with this situation and others going on with him and his family. So I called him, and I thought I was being loving and seeing how he was doing, and I asked him if there was anything that I could do for him. How thoughtful. He ended up getting pretty upset with me and told me that if I was truly loving, I would actually know what to do as opposed to having to ask him. This is such classic victim behavior. I'm confused, I guess, because I thought it was loving for me to ask him what he needed as opposed to assuming and very possibly getting it wrong. And you would be right. So what you did was loving, to call and say, so what can I do? How are you feeling? How are you handling this? Is there anything I can do to help? What a kind, thoughtful thing for you to do. Remember, however, that this person has just experienced some stress. Most people already don't feel loved in the first place. And so this guy's sister's in the ICU, and then it says that he's frustrated and stressed with that and with other situations going on with him and his family. So he's already down to a love reserve of 0, in the minus probably. And you call, and rather than say, wow, that was very cool, he chooses to be a complete victim because of his expectations. So it's very likely that other people had not called. So at least that's a possibility. So here he has these enormous needs, and if he has all these stresses, and if other people haven't called, then he's going to take all of his expectations that his life be fixed, and he's going to dump them all on who? Whoever calls. Whoever's close by. Now, he's probably already tried dumping them on his family, but, well, his sister's in the ICU, and everybody else is probably stressed, and his family has probably learned a pattern of shooting each other, so he's learned to avoid them. But you call and actually offer help, which, from a victim, is sometimes pretty much like saying, please shoot me. Please make me responsible for everything. So, did you do the right thing? You still did. But this is a nice illustration how, even if you do the right thing, if somebody comes from a sufficiently twisted perspective, you're doomed. Actually, you're not, because you can still react in a loving way. But they are. They're going to take everything as being too much or too little or too left or too right or too white or too black or too fat or too thin, and that's what victims do, which is what he did with you. He had these expectations, and who knows what they were, but you didn't meet them, and you were supposed to read his mind, and you didn't do that. So don't worry about that. That does not mean you screwed up. And we tend to do that. We tend to think if somebody reacted to us well, then we did it well. That's another huge mistake. Or if somebody reacts to us poorly, then we must have made a mistake. Both of those are errors. We pretty much are going to have to come to our own judgments of how we did a thing, because the way people react to us is a function more of where they are, and not a function of what we did. It's dependent on their ability to be loving, their ability to feel loved, their 30 to 40 to 50 years of experience before we ever came along. So all this really has very little to do with you. So what do you do now? The tendency would be, when you offer your help and somebody reacts like a baby, which is what he did, is to back off and go, well, heck with you then, I'm going to do nothing. Don't back off. Or at least I recommend that you not, because you'll learn a lot from this. So if you know what he wants now, if you can figure it out, if you can read his mind, then offer it. If you can offer it freely. In other words, if you want to. Now, if you don't want to, if his reaction has stressed you out to the point where you don't want to do anything, well then you don't have to. Just because somebody's screaming bloody murder doesn't mean you have to pull them out of the pool because they're drowning. It doesn't obligate you. They got there as a result of thousands of experiences, and those weren't your responsibility. Now, we should always, just because we want to be happy, offer as much love as we can. If you have none to give, then don't. But if you do, and if you haven't been able to read his mind, then you offer what you wish. You might offer time, as opposed to calling up and saying, well, what would you like? You might call and say, so would you like me to come over? and spend some time. And if he snaps, well, that's not it. You didn't read my mind. Well, then you say, hey, well, it was just a thought. And then you can either go down the list of guessing and trying to read his mind and offer different things, or you could ask him again what he'd. You have to experiment. You could offer him time. You could offer him somebody to talk to. You could just ask him again how he's doing with this. You experiment by offering different things or asking. And if nothing that you do is right, because sometimes that's what happens. I've run into some people, not a lot, but there are some people that no matter what you offer, it's wrong. So if you don't call them, then they curse you because you don't care. If you do call them, then they curse you because you're intruding and because you're being nosy. There are people who, no matter what you do, it's too much or it's too little. So you offer, and they can then either choose to accept and be happy with it, or they can choose to not. And if they don't, well, then it's not. And we have to learn to back away from those situations and let those people be who they are. And if they choose to be miserable, they get to. They get to be miserable. People do. Here's somebody who says, I was flying in an airplane and I saw that the watch on the man's arm sitting next to me was loose. The clasp was undone. I could say nothing, or I could point it out to the man. I know I can point it out to the man. If he ignores me or if he doesn't fix his watch, it won't bother me in the least, because I know it is his choice on how he takes the information I share with him. Is it more loving to share with him that his watch is loose, or should I just keep to myself and let the situation be? It's your call, as long as you're not attached to the outcome. When I type on my laptop, if my watch is fastened, my watch clicks right where my hand rests on the laptop and irritates my wrist like quite a bit. I mean, enough that if I did that a significant portion of the day, I would actually get sore. So whenever I type on my laptop, including on an airplane, I loosen the clasp of my watch. Now, the odds that my watch will actually fall off with the clasp undone must be close to zero, because it's never happened. No matter where I've been, and even though it's been many, many years that I've been doing this. And I actually had a lady on the airport once, on a plane, once say to me, "Your watch is loose." And I said, "Well, thank you." And then I went right back to doing what I was doing. And then she said, "Are you not going to fasten it back up?" At which point, she had gone over the line. You point out the information, and then it's up to them what they do with it. Now, of course, then I had to stop and explain to her why my watch was loose, which was none of her business. If she wanted to pass on the information to me, great. But I was doing something else. So then I had to stop and interrupt what I was doing, which I did willingly, and said to her, "Oh, I do this because of my laptop." And still, I'm not kidding you, still she looked at me like, "Well, so that's all the reason you have?" She wasn't going to quit until I fastened up my watch. I almost did it. So as long as we're just offering information, great. As soon as we expect people to act on it, that's just none of our business. We always have a right to make observations as long as they're not angry. Actually, you can make them when they're angry too if you want, but they're not going to go over very well. But gosh, you could be very helpful. What if the person didn't know? And what if they'd lost their watch before and said, "Oh wow, gee, thank you." So it can happen. And we're getting great questions from you, both live and that were sent to us before. But I'd like to encourage everybody who's listening, as we sometimes do, although I often forget, that if you have questions, send them both during the chat and at the end of the chat or between chats, to send them to me at Greg, Greg, at reallove.com. That would be, they'd be most welcome. We got a question from one reader here, a man who said, "I have found a place of acceptance as I've studied Real Love, and I enjoy it very much. I'm not always there, but most of the time with the Real Love principles, I can keep myself in this space. There are times when I think I'm being accepting that I find that I'm back in the pool splashing away. What I struggle with is loving. I see my unconditional loving as letting people just be, but maybe letting people be is just acceptance. I need some help here, so any input would be great." Your question is brilliant, because most people really don't see the difference between acceptance and loving. So as we tell the truth about ourselves, we create the opportunity for people to see us, then to accept us, then to love us. Now, acceptance is more passive. Acceptance is more the absence of disappointment and irritation. It's the absence of getting and protecting behaviors. Whereas loving is much more active. Loving is an active concern for the happiness of other people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it takes physical form. So, in other words, that I would actually have to be doing something for that person. I can accept somebody who's angry at me, but not be to the point where I can really care about their happiness, unconditionally love them. I can accept somebody and unconditionally love them, but not really demonstrate it in an outward way. For example, I can care for a friend who is on the other side of the country, care very much about his happiness, and yet not be in a position to actively do something for him in a given moment. So I can't speak to him in that given moment. I'm not on the phone with him. I'm not doing something for him. And yet my thoughts are very much focused on his well-being and my caring that he be happy. That is loving, even though you don't actually see my feet or hands doing something for him. I might be praying for him, for example. That would be an even more active form of caring, and yet I could be doing that silently without you ever being aware of it. So there are many ways that we can demonstrate our loving, with thoughts, with prayers, with words, with behavior, and it's just a more active thing than accepting. You continue. When I see that someone is about to hit a brick wall, and I know that all I can do is tell the truth about, hit a brick wall, I know all I can do is tell the truth about myself and my experiences and allow them, if they choose, to hit the wall. We're not talking about a literal brick wall, but some kind of psychological or emotional one. After hitting the wall, I just sit with them and try my best to listen to their victim reasoning about why they hit the wall, which is very common. I don't pick them up. I don't move the wall for them. I talk to them about choices and let them be. I accept them, but I do not try to change them. If they want to keep running into the wall, then that's okay with me. The thing is, you're being pretty active here. Quite active. I mean, here's somebody who has, made some mistake, caused some sort of emotional or other kind of injury to themselves, and you're genuinely listening to this person by your account, which alone is a loving act. If you just sat back and said, okay, well, that doesn't irritate me, that would be accepting. But you've gone further. You've gone out of your way to sit and listen to them. That's loving. You've gone even further, which is brave, because many people won't do this. And then you've attempted to, like you said here, I talked to them about choices. That's teaching them. Actually teaching people what they're capable of hearing. Whoa, that's powerfully loving. So these are very loving acts that you're describing here on behalf of this person. It's far more than just accepting. You continue. I do not see removing the wall or removing whatever difficulty is in their life as loving. I also do not see picking them up and moving them around the wall as loving. It would make them happy, perhaps, but I don't think that either of these choices are truly unconditionally loving. I will hold their hand or hug them, but ultimately I let them know that the wall in front of them is their wall, not mine. It's their responsibility. If I take away their responsibility, if I move the wall, for me, this is not loving. And you're right, it's not. That would be called rescuing or enabling. And people do love to be rescued or enabled. But the reason it's not loving is because loving means caring about their real happiness. And we can only feel happy as we feel loved and as we are loving and as we are responsible. And so you might possibly make them feel loved if you rescue them. They might feel cared for. But the other two legs of that stool for happiness, which is them being loving and them being responsible, you've cut out of the scenario. And so you've got a one-legged stool, and that's not very stable. So you're right, it's not. If you just rescue people consistently, what you actually do is make them weaker, and they become less able to be loving, less able to be responsible, and therefore less happy. So you actually harm them. You continue. Ultimately, if I move the wall for them, they'll be happy and like me, but in this case I've manipulated them also for their love and happiness. Yeah, that there could be an element of that too. And many of us do what I call the vicarious victim thing, and that is, and that's one reason that we tend to rescue people. We wish people had rescued us, and so we rescue others for that great feeling that comes from rescuing people. But see, then again, why are we rescuing them? Not because we love them, but for a feeling that we get. A feeling that we get that, wow, that we feel so valued and important, and so we get praise and power from it, and that's not genuine loving either. This manipulation, you continue, for acceptance, happiness, and love is not unconditional, it's imitation love. True. So you continue with an example. If my spouse left their clothes all over the house, I could lovingly pick them up, this is true, and it makes my spouse happy. But is this really unconditional love? Unless I, for some reason, promise my spouse that I would do this task, I don't see it as loving. I see it as taking away from my spouse responsibility and ultimately the consequences that result from it. If I didn't pick the clothes up, eventually my spouse would have no clean clothes to wear, and I would have to live in a dirty house, but that's something that wouldn't bother me because I know that I'm letting my spouse be. Recognizing that some people couldn't do that. Some people couldn't live in a dirty house just to let their spouse be. The natural consequence would eventually come to a head and become a wall for my spouse. I would, without anger or sarcasm, let them know that they have no clean clothes because they chose to have no clean clothes. Maybe, I would say to them, as Greg talks about in one of his books, I will wash all the clothes that are in the hamper. That is not moving the wall, it's a gift. The wall is still there. I wash clothes every other day. That is a task I am offering in an unconditional fashion. If you'd rather wash your own clothes, you may choose to do that. So yeah, that's one way to do it. Or you may have somebody, for example, who is just genetically and personality disposed to not pick up clothes. I mean, there are people who just are terrible at a particular task, in which case you sit down with them and say, look, I've seen you be loving and helpful in other ways in life. I've seen you do a lot of things well, be accountable and so on. But you seem to have a real problem with picking up your clothes. So what's with that? I mean, is that something that you just absolutely will not do? Let's just talk about this without the anger and the accusation. And if it turns out that this is a disability, in some families you just apportion responsibilities differently. So that, for example, rather than having everybody share every job equally, what if everybody doesn't have an equal affinity or inclination toward each job? It may be that one person's more inclined to do the laundry and pick up the laundry. The other person then would be more inclined to do all the outside chores, or would be inclined to make the beds or empty the dishwasher or whatever. You might say, look, here's the list of things that must be done in the house. Here are 13 things that have to be done every week. Here are 9 things that have to be done every day. Let's talk about how these things are going to get done. But they have to get done. So, we can't just say, I'm going to do them all. So what are we going to do? Now, if both of you work, that's reasonable. If one partner works outside the home and the other partner does not, then it actually becomes reasonable that the person who does not work outside the home, if that person's job is to stay home and maintain the physical environment of the home, it actually becomes reasonable, or a possibility that that person would become responsible for picking up all the clothes, doing all the laundry, doing all the errands, for example, and that certain other things would be divided. So this business of everything has to be divided equally down the middle is kind of crazy, because usually the people who whine about that are dividing only the things that they've been assigned to do. And then the things that their partner's doing, they don't divide those. So, for example, I've known a number of men and women, goes both ways, where their partner works full time. And so their partner's gone 10 hours a day working. They stay home and either have no job outside the home, or they have a part-time job of 3 hours a day. So here's 10 hours a day versus 3, and yet when their partner gets home, they say, well, now let's divide the chores equally. Well, it doesn't take an advanced mathematics degree to figure out that's not fair. And yet in their mind it is. Well, we have to divide that all. Well, then if it's fair, then you have to go with your partner to work and work half of the part-time, half of the full-time hours. And see, that's not going to work out. So it's a matter of breaking things up so that the distribution of labor is relatively equitable, not equal from second to second. You start playing that game and it's going to be pretty miserable. You continue. For me, the step from acceptance to loving needs to be guarded. That is, you need to ask yourself, are you doing this task to get someone to like you, accept you, or love you more? It's a difficult space to look for the truth about ourselves. Yes, it is. And requires some real honesty. It's all about what we expect. So, if we're doing a thing to get something for ourselves, then we start keeping score. And scorekeeping in a relationship becomes just very dangerous. So we won't get off on the dividing of tasks individually, but the real issue here is how to get to more loving. And I think you've talked about that really quite well. The bottom line about loving is that I see many people in real love really enjoy the experience of telling the truth about themselves and getting loved. Oh, that's a hoot. But see, just getting loved is not enough to be happy. There are the other two legs of the stool, which is being loving and being responsible. If we just stop at getting loved, if we just make our phone calls and it's all about love me, love me, love me, we're not going to be happy. It's impossible. We have to make some effort on our own to share what we have with others and to both accept them and then go further to care about their happiness, to love them in the ways that we've already talked about. Until we do that, our happiness will be significantly limited. Feeling loved is good, but loving is way better, way cooler. Here's somebody who said, I've been around real love for a long time, but sometimes I feel like a complete retard, like today. Well, welcome to the endless practice of real love, sweetie, because many occasions I feel like a complete retard too. I ran into a couple of people from church today at the supermarket at 2 different times, 2 different families. I felt like a complete social idiot. I felt tongue-tied. Didn't know what to say other than, how are you, and isn't it a nice day? Those times leave me wondering what I've been doing for the past 10 years. Man, it's like, hello, is anybody home in my head? Why do these moments come up? I feel like I should always know what to say, and I don't. What's wrong with me? Oh, probably not much wrong. You're learning to feel more loved yourself. You're learning how to unconditionally love people under certain circumstances. So we get better and better at loving people. You're learning to love people better when they attack you. You're learning to love people better on conference calls. You're learning to love your spouse and children better, I'm guessing. And then circumstances come up that you just don't experience very often. So you're used to seeing somebody at church where, for example, you might talk to them about the Bible. You might talk to them about whatever the context is that you're surrounded by at church. So you're used to that language. You're used to those interchanges. You know what to talk about there. You sing together, you pray together, you go to classes together, and so what do you talk about? Those things. So then you run into them in the supermarket, and you're going, I don't know what to say here. It's a little unusual. It's like, well, let's see, I probably can't talk about the hymns we're about to sing or the Sunday school class because we're not in church. So, but what else is there? And gradually, as you feel more relaxed, you'll realize that people just love to be asked about themselves. So, how are the kids? And you might practice for this while you're at church. In other words, by learning more about them. So the more you learn about them, the more reasonable questions you can ask. So the more I learn about people, I can follow up and say, so how is that son of yours who was getting the biopsy that I heard about, 3 months ago? How did that go? In these times of economic difficulties, how's it going for you guys? Learn something about them. If you don't know spit about them, stop for 30 seconds and say, I'm kind of embarrassed that I don't know very much about you. I see you here with your wife or here with your husband. Do you guys have kids? I see you at church with no kid, but I've never asked you. And you don't have to draw it into a long conversation. It doesn't have to take all day. After all, they're there in the supermarket not to talk to you, amazingly. They're there to get, food or whatever, tires. Tires are found in the frozen food section. So whatever they're there to do, just ask them a question or two about themselves and say, well, I didn't know that. Nice talk. And you tell them a little about yourself or blah, blah, blah. And then say, nice seeing you here. I know you got to get on shopping. If they want to stay and talk to you, it will be obvious. They'll stop what they're doing and look at you like in the eye. If it's obvious they want to get on with their shopping, then that's pretty obvious too, because they don't take their hands off the shopping cart, and you'll see them pointing the cart away from you, and their bodies will be turned sidewards from you. So it's like, how many clues do you need? So then, all you have to do is say a couple of social pleasantries, and on you go. But if they turn to you, then you can turn it into a 2-minute conversation, and you've learned a little more, and you feel like you had more practice in caring about them. So don't feel bad. You just met them in a bizarre place is all. I used to, when I had patients all over the planet, everywhere I went, people would say hello to me. And I'm seeing these people away from the office. Well, I'd never seen them away from the office before. And so I'm going, in the first place, I'm going, I know I've seen this person. Where is it? So it's hard to recognize people away from the usual place. And then if they're a patient, you really have to think up something to ask. Well, so, I see you here alone. Do you have, is your family here with you? That's a really neutral way of saying your family without showing that you can't remember if they have a husband or wife. Because you don't want to say, is your husband here? And they say, remember I told you a month ago that he was dead? So that just takes a little bit of thinking. And I couldn't very well in the grocery store, if they were a patient, bring up whatever I talked to them about in the office, So, how's that gonorrhea? That doesn't go over very well in the grocery store either when they're with their children. So you'll figure it's about just kind of feeling relaxed and not feeling stupid just because you didn't know what to say. Just sort of calm down, So I think actually we've come to the end of our questions for the evening. Let's see. Yeah, we have. So it's been a real tickle. It's been fun getting your live questions, which were abundant. And we look forward to seeing you a week from tonight on Tuesday, and look forward to getting your questions in the mail. And between now and then, just remember that it's always about real love. We'll talk to you then.